My friends, the Trump administration has just revealed, I would say, the biggest bomb, a nuclear bomb of the decade. How the globalist left used the pandemic to silence and persecute conservatives in the United States, in Brazil, and to seize power. And the main tool behind all of this has a name, Dr. Fauci, who later in Congress, in the US Senate, simply refused to answer more than 100 questions that were asked.
Although it pains me to do so because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress. Under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
But they found the diary of this man who implemented the lockdown, who invented the vaccine, who manipulated the whole world with more than 1,000 pages where he admitted it. For example, that the closure, the lockdown, had no scientific basis. After having ruined the lives of thousands of Americans, thousands of Brazilians. Do you remember Globo with Globocop, the helicopter filming from above? Stores filming businesses and demanding that the police shut the door of that worker's shop, because that's what happened. And today, Paulo Henrique Araujo, reporting directly from the halls of Washington, brings us the reaction. I would say this is one of the biggest bombshells, including in electoral terms, of the decade, Paulo Henrique Araujo.
Well, Shimon, things have really heated up around here, and a lot is happening even at the state level within the United States of America regarding this, my friend. Well, just so we can do a little historical overview of what has been happening, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he is the senior advisor. Actually, he was the senior White House advisor to several presidents. He was in a position where he couldn't be fired. He had held the position since 1984. That is, he served under Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and Trump. And during President Biden's term, he ended up retiring. Today, Anthony Fauci is 85 years old, just to give you an idea. And a lot of things already raised doubts about his work. In fact, in the 90s, he even recommended the use of a medication that would have greatly harmed the health of people who are HIV positive, yes, carriers of the AIDS virus. And many people would have already died because of that. These investigations in the US Senate, in fact, are being brought back from the 90s. And during the pandemic period, we had several clashes between President Donald Trump and then advisor Anthony Fauci. Trump had already shown a lot of dissatisfaction with him since his first term, mainly because of the rules he was helping to impose in several states. And this led to a major crisis in the United States, especially in Democrat-leaning states like New York, California, among others, my dear Shimon. Well, what do we have then? President Donald Trump has already been declassifying documents and turning over several investigations into various cases here in the United States. And precisely on the day when Anthony Fauci was summoned to speak on the subject, the White House took it a step further. What did they do? They simply went ahead and launched the COVID.org website. And on this COVID.org website, there are several declassified documents showing what was happening. Well, Shimon, what do we have in the middle of all this? Mr. Anthony Fauci, he invoked the Fifth Amendment. And keep this information in mind. It's very important, okay? He invoked the Fifth Amendment precisely to avoid answering questions. And why did he do that? In the last few hours, and I'm really talking about the last few hours here, Donald Trump, before taking office at noon, was surprised with a presidential pardon signed by President Joe Biden to Anthony Fauci for anything that might have been done from 2014 up until that date, January 20, 2025. And some suspect that it wasn't even Biden who signed that presidential pardon, but the auto pen. Yes, That machine, right? That has Joe Biden's signature on file and can be used. Not just Joe Biden, but all presidents have been using the auto pen for many decades, okay? Just to make it clear here, but the accusation is that in the Biden administration, its use was allegedly greater than normal. Well, in the midst of all this, then all the scrutiny began in the Senate. And Anthony Fauci, he invoked the Fifth Amendment 111 times. In fact, the senator said to him the following: "Look, what color is your tie? What color is the carpet in front of you? What day of the week is it today?" And all these questions were answered, right, by invoking the American Fifth Amendment, where a person cannot incriminate themselves. So he invoked this right to remain silent. To remain silent, right? To refrain from speaking. Well, after all that, a very thorough scrutiny began. As you said, we even had several excerpts from his diary that were made public, right? Senator Ron Paul, who is a Republican, got this information and started to make it public, and the scrutiny began. One of the most controversial statements comes precisely from the Secretary of Health of the United States of America, namely Kennedy Jr., who was a Democrat at the time, is now part of the Trump administration. And he said the following, that there are records indicating that after he took the medication, he went on TV to take the medication and recommend it to everyone. He had serious health problems, okay? Serious lung and heart health problems. And this is further intensifying the debate. This started to gain a lot of traction here in the United States. People who were supporters of the lockdown, among other things, started to speak out and apologize for what they had done, and even for having persecuted other people, some even in the sports world. Just so we have an idea, my dear Shimon. Well, what did we have then in the midst of all this? I know, look, there's a lot here, but we need to give our audience some context. One possibility, they started looking for a way to somehow break through the protection he got from Joe Biden. That's not simple. Why? In Brazil, we've reached such a disastrous situation in politics and the judiciary precisely because the Constitution and the law are not respected. For example, President Jair Bolsonaro granted a presidential pardon to Daniel Silveira. Alexandre de Moraes overruled this, and the presidential decree, the presidential pardon, simply ceased to be valid. Here in the United States, no matter how bad the issue involving Anthony Fauci is, this won't happen, because here we have the rule of law, right? Here we have the rule of law, and it works. It works very well. Now, what's the point? They're looking for ways to at least make Anthony Fauci's life hell. That's what's being said, okay? This expression is being used here in the United States. And how would that be done, Shimon? Well, the first point was to identify if it's possible to classify it as contempt, okay? Contempt regarding the fact that he invoked the Fifth Amendment the way he did it. And now this has become the subject of a Department of Justice investigation. Remember, I asked you to keep that information? That's right. It can be considered contempt if he invokes the Fifth Amendment to refuse to answer, for example, what color his tie is, what color the carpet in front of him is, or what day of the week it is today. And here it was deemed that he used the American Fifth Amendment in an abusive way, okay? Unnecessarily. He went beyond the right he had regarding the Fifth Amendment. So that's the first point. Another point, which is now also starting to be scrutinized, is precisely a case law from 1890 and 96. Look at this, my dear Shimon, 1896. And here, another side note for us to make a comparison with Brazil. The United States has had the same constitution since the 18th century. And this makes it possible to have a historical and continuous record that remains valid, right? Brazil's already going on its eighth constitution, right? Many people want a new constitution, which means Brazil is refounded every 20 or 30 years, which is terrible. So, what does this 1896 case law say? It's in the case of Brown versus Walker, okay? So, what did we have? Someone who received a presidential pardon. He later tried to invoke the Fifth Amendment, and there is an understanding from the U.S. Supreme Court in that case that a person who received a presidential pardon does not have the right to invoke the Fifth Amendment. So this could complicate things even more for Anthony Fauci, because if this goes further, he will be called again to the Senate and will not have the right to remain silent. Well, still on the issue of contempt, he could be sentenced to up to a year in prison. Since he is 85 years old, this could be converted to a lighter sentence, like a month in jail, for example, or even a fine. However, we can already see that Fauci isn't sleeping well. Remember that I said the intention was to make his life hell? That's right, my friends. Now, there are also several states, okay? Several American states are starting to establish state-level lawsuits so that Anthony Fauci will have to answer in state courts. Remember, there are 50 states in a federation here. And then the presidential pardon is at the federal level, but not at the state level. So we already have the state of Florida, which has started the process against him. And we have two more states, Oklahoma and Louisiana, that are also going down this same path. And the number could reach up to 27 states, the states that are controlled by the Republicans. What could happen in the middle of all this, my dear Shimon? Well, to wrap up the comment, Anthony Fauci might only have 23 states to travel within the United States. If he sets foot in any of those 27 states, if he is convicted and sentenced, he wouldn't be able to enter at risk of arrest. Yeah, my friend. Now imagine you're flying from the East Coast to the West Coast, for example, a flight from New York to California. The plane has an emergency and it needs to land. Someone got sick during the flight. This happens in one of those states, and it turns out that Anthony Fauci is on the flight. Life is not going to be easy.
He will be monitored, right? 24 hours a day until he makes a small mistake. Now, I think what stands out the most about all this is that the rules he imposed in the United States were imported to Brazil. He dictated the rules together with the WHO. Now, the WHO has been making statements that it never ordered anything to be closed. Never ordered, right? A lockdown like the one that was imposed. Now, the WHO has presented another guideline in case a new pandemic happens, which, God forbid, totally different from what was done before. And the big issue, Paulo Henrique Araujo, what happened in the United States and happened in Brazil was manipulation, the use of the left to destroy the right, right? There in the United States, Trump, right? And part of Trump's defeat, let's put it this way, is credited to the American president's actions during the pandemic and here in Brazil too, right? Rede Globo talked about Bolsonaro 24 hours a day, and doctors who took a stand against the vaccine were targets of ridicule. People who, for example, influencers who questioned the effectiveness, questioned the vaccine were called deniers. 24 hours a day, censorship was applied to channels, to anyone who dared to question the pandemic, question the lockdown, question the issue of vaccines. They used the vaccines as a weapon of mass destruction against the right, against conservatives, against Bolsonaro, right? They started using the word genocidal casually in everyday speech, calling Bolsonaro genocidal 24 hours a day on the internet and on television. Genocidal. Something that was only used against people, right? Yeah, like Stalin, like that mustache guy over in Germany, right? And they started comparing President Bolsonaro to a genocidal person. And today we see what a big farce that was. Because all the actions they took, and I want to highlight this, all the actions to keep people locked inside their homes, to control people inside their homes, had no scientific basis, right? The issues regarding the vaccines that were raised as well. How can it be, right? Then the father, the mother, the family members stop to think. How did I allow a substance that was not even tested to be injected into my 90-year-old father? Right? It didn't even have proven effectiveness yet. Then they said the vaccine saves lives. Globo, right? Globo's artists made songs telling people to stay at home, right? Businesses went bankrupt. Families fell into poverty right in this dark period of human history. And today we found out that it was a big manipulation. It's right there in the guy's diary. He was vain, Paulo Henrique. He was vain because he wrote about how famous he was becoming, how his words became laws in the United States, even though he was never elected, Paulo Henrique.
Look, Shimon, a few things about this, right? His ego was really stroked. At the time, he was about 78 or 79 years old. There were magazines here in the United States that ran cover stories calling Anthony Fauci a sex symbol. Women are attracted to Anthony Fauci. I don't know if you remember this at the time, my man Shimon, but look at what we have in the middle of all this. An interview he gave to Julia Roberts is also being brought back, right? She did a live stream where she says he was a personal hero to her, and she gets all amazed by him. She squeals with excitement when she sees him on camera. It's one of the most embarrassing things we have. On the COVID.org website, which Donald Trump published, anyone can access it. You'll land on the White House microsite, okay? So that's inside the files of the American government. There it shows all the failures of the lockdown in New York, where Andrew Cuomo, he acted incredulous. I was following everything at the time, you know? I was already covering the United States. I was still in Brazil, but I was closely following all of this. I remember very well that after 2 months of lockdown, Andrew Cuomo looked and saw that the curve hadn't flattened, that many people were dying, especially in nursing homes, and things had gotten worse. And in the interview, he was incredulous and said, I don't understand what happened. I followed all the rules, everything that was recommended, without knowing how to justify all of that. And right after all this started happening, and when Andrew Cuomo might have become a problem and started talking too much, they found a way to remove him from the mayor's office in New York, right? Not the mayor's office, sorry, the New York state government. He was the governor. Yeah, they made a sexual harassment accusation against him, and after that, he was out of the game. So much so that last year, in the latest elections for the mayor of New York, Andrew Cuomo had the endorsement of Donald Trump to try to unseat Zohar Mandami, which ended up not working out very well. Well, Shimon, if you allow me, I wrote a short article this week about this issue of Jair Bolsonaro, Donald Trump, and the 2020 pandemic that you mentioned. And it was an article that went viral, right? It has over 70,000 reads, right? So I would like to share this text with the audience here. Jair Bolsonaro, Donald Trump, and the 2020 pandemic. The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, was an open advocate of something humanity has always done, seeking solutions to new problems. He didn't invent the recommendation to use hydroxychloroquine. He talked to doctors and scientists from Brazil and other countries. The Brazilian media, with political objectives in their newsrooms, turned this into an attack on human life, made a mockery of it, and destroyed the public image of the head of state. Years went by. Several countries, such as the United Kingdom, presented studies showing that, yes, the medication was substantially effective against the disease. Now, Dr. Fauci, an American bureaucrat who was used as a buffer and for validation, is being scrutinized in the United States. The White House is releasing documents, evidence, and proof of the absurdities committed by him and his benefactors, as well as the promising results of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. These same media outlets and newsrooms, which today talk so much about sovereignty in line with the Lula administration, unjustly accused the then president of being against the purchase of vaccines. When Brazil was one of the countries with the most effective and fastest vaccine program in the world, Jair Bolsonaro questioned the clauses imposed mainly by Pfizer, which did not take any risk or responsibility for the medication, demanding that governments take responsibility for future lawsuits or health damage suffered by vaccinated individuals. The first vaccine in the world was administered on December 8, 2020 in the United Kingdom. The first vaccine was administered in Brazil on January 17, 2020, de 2021. My dear friends, 40 days, and here's the thing, Brazil didn't manufacture it. Bolsonaro was the victim of the biggest campaign to destroy his reputation and public image in the history of Brazil. He was accused of several crimes he didn't commit, and even today, he's still paying the price for all of it. I, as a journalist, understand that our responsibility is only to tell the truth. And when we make mistakes, we have a moral duty to clarify the facts to our audience. How many colleagues will do that now? I'll leave you with that question. Shimon, I made a point of writing this article.
No, you said it all.
Yeah, there are points here that really touch me, and it hurts to see how people are manipulated. I feel sorry for the people. Because even today, I talk to many Brazilian people who say the following. Yeah, I lost my uncle, my mother, my father, my brother, my husband. Anyway, because that guy didn't buy the vaccines. He didn't want to buy the vaccines. That's it. And when you talk to people, actually, I don't even argue anymore because, the person is in fight mode. They want to find someone to blame for the pain of losing a loved one. And I really respect that. Mas, do you realize how cruel that is? Man, look, now I'm going to put aside the journalist, the analyst here, Shimon. Do you realize how inhuman that is? You, for political purposes, for the sake of taking power, to put a criminal like the one we have today as president of Brazil, like everything that was done, you manipulate people's grief? Everyone Bolsonaro didn't refuse to buy any vaccines. What he wanted was a commitment from these companies and responsibility to protect the lives of people who decided to get inoculated. But he said he was against it. No, he said he was against it, but he didn't stop anyone from taking the medicine, and he refused to require or force people to take it. What the media wanted was for the president to force people to get vaccinated. The president was fighting for people to have their right to individual choice, and the media wanted him to be authoritarian. And now today they put him in jail on charges that he staged a coup d'etat. This country is crazy, Shimon.
No, I was going to tell you this. They wanted Bolsonaro to force people to take the vaccine because today the data came out. There are doctors in the United States saying that over 70% of the deaths happened because people took the vaccine. A vaccine with no testing, not fully developed, not properly tested. You take a vaccine that was just made, give it to an elderly person with comorbidities, someone who already has heart problems, who already has lung problems, someone who already had some kind of crisis, and the person would die. I lost a grandmother. The old lady was there. She was already sick. She didn't get COVID. She took the vaccine and died. A few months later, she died. So Paulo Henrique, it was this manipulation. Today, they would be blaming Bolsonaro. You see? This dictator, this genocidal man forced people to take a vaccine that wasn't tested. Because here's the thing, what father, what mother in their right mind of their own free will would take their child to have medicine put into that child's body that has no proof, no evidence that it works? That's what Globo, and I want to say the name, Globo, SBT, Record Bandeirantes, the press, that's what the old media did to Brazilians. They manipulated Brazilians. And there are leftists even today, because that's one of their weapons of war. There are leftists who still say that the vaccine saved Brazil, that Doria saved Brazil. They're suckers. They took up this activism to go out on the streets and spread the biggest lie of the century. I don't think we'll ever have a bigger lie than this pandemic. And now Trump is revealing hidden documents, hidden cases that the globalist left used to manipulate the whole world. And it was the whole world, Paulo Henrique. It wasn't just the United States. Brazil went through it too. The Globo Network, once again, guys, the scene, right? We can picture the scene, Globocop flying over the neighborhoods, filming with that camera of theirs that can reach for miles. Stores open during the pandemic, and the reporter calling it out live. Attention, attention police, attention municipal guard. Attention authorities, look at the crime that vendor is committing. Governors sending the police to shut down with force the business of that family who only had that to survive. They destroyed hundreds of thousands of businesses. They bankrupted hundreds of thousands of families for something that had no scientific basis whatsoever. Paulo Henrique. So, the gravity of this, I know that Brazil is not going to revisit this story. They revisit the military period. They revisit that period. They compensate families. Dilma doesn't receive a pension, right, for supposedly having suffered during the military period. They're going to revisit the pandemic period because the documents, the evidence, the proof that it was a farce are out there. It's not just a theory of ours, the conservatives, Paulo Henrique, right? It's proven that we were manipulated and that the people who died didn't die because the government didn't want to save them or because the government wanted to kill them. No. Because they manipulated the whole country, the whole world, and caused those people, the thousands who died, to die that way. Because if they hadn't acted this way, fewer people would have died. Because it's there in his diary, Paulo, I'll pass it on to you. Yeah, it's in Fauci's diary that there was no proof for that kind of isolation, and mask use wasn't shown to be that effective either, right? Yeah, and that they hadn't figured anything out. So they twisted the information to fit their own desires and forced it down the throats of the American people, the Brazilian people, in Europe, all over the world. Paulo. And there's something even worse, Paulo, that's in his diary.
That's right. Look, there's still a lot that's going to come to light, Shimon. And I wanted to touch on a few points you mentioned, right? Because Anthony Fauci, he served as a shield. And when we start digging, following the money and seeing a lot of things, we're going to find the hand of the Chinese Communist Party behind all of this. You can be sure of that, my friend, because at the time, I have an article published in 2020 and 2021, early 2021, there, talking specifically about a meeting that took place here in Chicago, where the China Media Group brought together several TV stations from the United States and all the major networks, newspapers, and television from Latin America. And there it was, basically a briefing on what was supposed to be said, how China was doing a wonderful job fighting the pandemic and everything else. And there, in that article that I actually found at the time, right, I wrote an article about this. It even includes participation from directors of Rede Globo de Televisão and Grupo Bandeirantes. Grupo Bandeirantes, which is funded by China Media Group. It's good for us to remember this, that it's connected to the Chinese Communist Party. But Timon, before we wrap up, I wanted to remind everyone about a person named Attila Lamarino, okay? Yes, Attila Lamarino. I remember when he became popular during the pandemic, he used to do live streams for 120,000 people on YouTube. Then he would grab the microphone like this and he would speak softly to make it dramatic, and he would talk because we will have millions, more than 1 million people dead. Bodies will be in the streets and the army will have to come and remove the bodies.
Is this guy Brazilian, Paulo?
Yeah, he's Brazilian, Attila Lamarino, without an ear. You'll remember that people talked a lot about him because of that. And Attila Lamarino later became a pop star. He was called to Congress as a political weapon to attack Bolsonaro, right? He took part. Go check his social media profiles and you'll see all of that, right? And then he ended up disappearing, right? After he was used a lot, but it was a scary thing. He was one of those who promoted panic the most and became an authority because he said what served the structure that was being set up. Just to remind you, Shimon, I was one of the people who, well, I was struck by the Chinese plague in 2022, okay? Only at the end of the pandemic, and even then I did the recommended preventive treatment, right? With the medications that are even said now to be effective and that are mentioned in Anthony Fauci's journal, right? He refuses to talk about those medications. There are already studies in the United Kingdom. There are already studies in the United States against hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. You don't even remember, Shimon, if we mentioned those names, said the word vaccine on YouTube, the channel would get taken down. The video would get demonetized. You couldn't do anything. But now things are coming to light. And now not even YouTube is apologizing to anyone, right? The journalists don't apologize. Everyone just gets away with it.
Scoundrels, scoundrels.
There's a movement now here in the United States. This was already happening here last year, which is the following. People who got inoculated with the medication are facing health problems, right? People with fibromyalgia, people who have clots. There are already several images of people who go in for surgery and they remove those clots, those huge strands of clots caused by the vaccine and everything else, which is a reflection, right, of the medication that wasn't properly tested. So what do we have there? Now they're saying the following. They're blaming those who were being called deniers for not being emphatic enough and not insisting enough to wake other people up.
What a disgrace.
They used to arrest. The urge you have, my friend, is to pull your hair out, grab the keyboard, smash it against the wall, you know? It's running out into the street naked and screaming because what are you going to say? What are you going to say? And in Brazil, let me ask, did we have a half-hour special report on Fantástico? Did we have a report like the one that was made against Terça Livre? I remember well back in 2020 saying that they were getting money from the government. But they did a 20-minute report on Jornal Nacional and didn't say that the money came from Google AdSense and the amount was 4 reais and 57 cents. But that's professional journalism, huh?
It's William Bonner. Where is that scoundrel? He's a scoundrel. He used to sigh like this. Of course, they were worn out from scheming, manipulating, humiliating, and persecuting Brazilians, right? This guy has to pay, this scoundrel, right?
You know what's worse, Shimon? I have my doubts. Maybe he's just a useful idiot, one of those arrogant ones. And now that he sees he was made a fool, he doesn't have the decency or the character to come out in public.
I think that
William
Bonner used to make millions for what he did. He's not just a well-paid, useful idiot, right? Because he has to be extremely intelligent and capable. And besides, he was the one in charge of the newscast, right? He was the one who decided what he would say or not. Right? A guy with even a little bit of integrity would say, no, this isn't for me. I'm out. I'm out. If it's about lying, manipulating, I'm out. Because a lot of things there weren't just because the guy was acting on instinct, Paulo. In my opinion, obviously, right? It wasn't just instinct. Everything was very coordinated, you know? Everything was too perfect. The characters, they chose who to demonize. They chose who would be the heroes, right? Yeah, I understand that there are useful idiots. Yes, many, many idiots. But a guy like Bonner, right? A guy from a network sponsored by the Communist Party. Just look at that, right? Then the pandemic passed and so on. Globo goes into a crisis, and today, who's one of Fantastico's biggest sponsors, for example? Every Sunday, there's a story speaking well of China on Fantastico, right? Who pays Bandeirantes, for example? The Chinese Communist Party, directly. So these guys, they wrecked Brazil and now they pretend like nothing happened. Okay? Guys, we have Paulo Henrique's books. They're right here in my hand now, huh, Paulo? Look, here are the books, right? Nice. The Fall of Democracy in Brazil, How Democracy, it's on the card here, guys, okay? For you to get the books, all right? By Paulo Henrique. Want to see the lay of the land before the herd does? Not be caught by surprise, not be fooled anymore like you were by Rede Globo? Here it is, look. Another book, this one is for you to understand how the globalists took power inside the United States. To understand the war that's happening now. Here it is, look. This book is here on the card and here's the number one son, right? Paulo Henrique's favorite was Araujo. The São Paulo Forum and the Great Homeland, for you to understand how Lula and how the left acts here in Latin America. And there are many other books at the PHPH Vox publishing house, right? It's 300 videos a month, Paulo. And in all 300 videos, I'm selling your books. By selling, I became the biggest bookseller on YouTube. There it is, look, on the card, guys. So you can get out of the bubble that traps us and think outside the box, right? Like how to work. So that's it. Follow Paulo Henrique Araujo on social media, including his YouTube channel. Paulo Henrique, how can people find you there?
You can find me on PH Vox, that's PH Vox Geopolítica Descomplicada, and on PH Araujo nos Estados Unidos, those two channels.
Guys, now pay attention to this. The weakness of someone who loses control of their own narrative is brutal. Whether it's in the chess game of high geopolitics or in the ruthless survival of the free market. The same pain felt by a political leader who sees their stands empty because they can no longer hold the audience is the pain that destroys great talents today. Because in the game of power and in the struggle to survive in the market, those who are not seen are swallowed up. Today, the most valuable currency in the world is attention. For you, as a top entrepreneur or professional, what hurts the most is being the best at what you do and still remaining invisible. You have a great business, great knowledge, but no one knows you exist. Have you noticed how hard it is for people to absorb serious content on social media? It seems like only silly dances or pointless memes go viral. 15 years ago, on radio and television, I understood that the mechanism to build authority requires dense content and a lethal strategy. Today, I generate over 50 million views per month on my social media, monetized in dollars. The method is now proven. And now, with this knowledge in my hands, I'm recruiting entrepreneurs and experts who are the best, but still remain in the shadows to break through the bubble, be recognized at the top, and have their expertise monetized. Because the game now is about media, and those who understood that managed to break through the bubble. Your identity can't be outsourced. The owner needs to show his face and set the vision. Is the time over when you could just record a video with your phone any way you wanted and still get results? The digital world demands absolute professionalism to force the algorithm to work for you. So, on August 16th, I'll host a 100% in-person immersion face-to-face with me in my studio. Take advantage of this opportunity. The QR code is on the screen, the secure link is in the description and in the first pinned comment. But I'm ruthless. There are only 3 spots left. When the last spot is taken, the steel door closes, and I don't know when we'll have another opportunity. So don't miss the opportunity to sit face to face with someone who does it, with someone who put it into practice. It's not theory, it's not just a little video, it's not a motivational show. It's what I do, how I do it, tailored to your situation. Click the button now and join me. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, give the video a like because it takes work to make it. Shield your mind. I'm Shimon Oliveira and I'll see you at our next meeting. See you then.